Hey, what is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. That time of week again, everybody's favorite segment here, the MLB Power Rankings. For everyone celebrating today, happy Mother's Day to everyone. I know we had a great day here watching baseball, hanging out with each other. It's my wife's first Mother's Day with our daughter, so that was super fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Of course, across the MLB, it's always a special time. We see the pink out everywhere. So I hope you guys got to enjoy a little bit of that as well. We're going to go through all 30 teams. And guys, this is starting to get a little tough. If you looked and watched last week's power rankings, a couple teams that were down there, they're on an 8-game win streak. We'll get to them. Top row seems to be starting to solidify who are the top teams in the MLB. The bottom row is starting to solidify. This second and third bottom two rows is starting to be very difficult to kind of figure out. So we'll talk about that as we go along. But before we do, guys, please like and subscribe. We just crossed over 1,500 subscribers, which is a massive milestone on the channel. And I just love seeing some of the same faces and comments every week. And I love engaging with you guys. So the more people, just makes it more exciting. I want to try and get people from all of the teams, discussing all the teams, because of course with 30 teams playing 6 to 7 games a week, it's hard to stay on top of every single one of it, working full time, being a dad, all that fun stuff. Of course, I'm trying, but this is pretty much my fun part of the week. So number 30, not too much to talk about. We do have the Colorado Rockies. Think they're going to stay there all season. Last time I said that about a team, they went on a heater and now they're up a couple of spots, but the Rockies are on pace to possibly be worse than the White Sox last season. Let's keep that in mind. They did pick up a win today over the Padres after giving up 21 runs yesterday. They were on an 8-game losing streak going into today. So 1-5 on the week, getting swept by Detroit earlier in the week. Not a lot to talk about when it comes to the Rockies. Number 29. So in the bottom row is a little bit difficult. I did a little bit of shuffling around on who I think is going to be worse. And a lot of it has to do with how I see the trajectory of this team going later in the season, as well as going on to the future years. So the Angels, they did have a pretty decent week, all things considered, a 500 week in the bottom row. Somewhat decent. They beat the Blue Jays in an earlier series, but if you looked at that one closely, they probably should have got swept in that series, let alone the one game they won in the middle there. They had a 9th inning rally that just took that win. So they win that series 2-1. They lose to Baltimore 1-2, overall 500 against the AL East. Pretty good week for them, but when you're starting to look at the depth of this team and the analytics, it's starting to be a lot of concerning, especially with the West here in the American League. The Athletics are starting to look better. Houston, Texas starting to get a little bit stronger. Seattle having a season, and it looks like to me the Angels are by far the worst team in the American League, and that's saying something. Next up, we have the Pittsburgh Pirates. So other than the Rockies, I'm pretty sure every team had a... No, never mind. Forget what I was about to say, but the Pittsburgh Pirates did have a winning series over the weekend here against the Atlanta Braves. They went to extras in the one game they lost as well, but every game, I think they only won by 1 run. So I think every game overall was only by 1 run. When you start to look at the depth of this Pittsburgh Pirates and how they win, it's not very pretty, and they definitely have a pretty ugly run differential. Getting swept by the Cardinals earlier in the week as well, a team where I kind of matched them up earlier in the season that they thought these two teams would be better. I thought the Pirates would definitely be better. I thought they'd have the better number of the Cardinals, but it seems like we have a tale of two different teams right now. Next up, Washington Nationals are kind of floating in this situation. I think you could argue that they might be the ones falling down here because the other two teams maybe have a good chance to move up. 1-5 on the week. We did see the Nationals start off relatively strong and I had a little bit of hope, but I think in this strong National League East, it's going to be a little tough for the Nationals to make a lot of headway, especially because the National League seems to be stacked overall. So Washington gets swept by the Cardinals over the weekend. Not super close in really any of the games. Cardinals kind of had their number, and then won 1-2 against Cleveland at the start of the week. Two teams that are on this board in the middling area. 1-5 week. Washington kind of still in that rebuilding situation. Number 26, I do have the Miami Marlins. What's starting to consider, they were 1 spot up higher last week. They lose both their series this week. They lose to the Chicago White Sox, who we'll talk about in 1 second, and the Dodgers both times 1-2. The Marlins seem to be one of those teams that they're going to pick up probably a win in most series. I think they have the capability and the pitching to be able to at least avoid sweeps more times than not. But for the most part, they're not really the kind of team that puts winning streaks together. And on the other side, they're kind of stopping losing streaks, but they tend to lose more than they win, of course. They got a couple of guys that are shown their way to be somewhat contenders. It's a young team, and they're in their rebuild stage. Are they going to be able to make their mark this year? It definitely does not seem so. Next up, I do have the Chicago White Sox, and this was interesting to me. When you look at standings-wise, sure, they might have one of the worst records. I think record-wise, they're kind of worse than the Angels, Marlins for sure, maybe even the other two. Not the Rockies. But when you start looking at it a little closer, the run differential, the White Sox, it's not too bad. They're not even in the bottom 10 in the league, I think, in that category. So that had me digging a little deeper. I think the thing that is really affecting their record the most is that they are 2-10 in one-run games. So bullpen, if they maybe address that issue, because we've seen them blow a couple late inning games, definitely seems to be an opportunity for the White Sox. I think overall they seem to be better than the rest of the teams. But I think you can pull straws. When we're talking about this bottom row, I think for sure the bottom row is going to be the same for pretty much anyone in the power rankings. So when we start to break out of it, it's going to be different. They beat Miami, so that's part of what boosted up. We saw them beat other teams in this bottom row as well, going along here. And I think the White Sox, maybe give them a little credit this week. But 0-4 against the Royals made it difficult, so maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Next up, 24, and this is, I think we start to get into a different category of team. While Baltimore has had a really rough year, they finished the week with a win, beating the Angels 2-1, winning today in the rubber match. I think it was a big win that Baltimore really needs to boost here. They're on a little road trip out to LA, and they needed this. They really did. Getting swept by Minnesota at the beginning of the week. A team that had been in the bottom row and start to really address my concerns of Baltimore. But at the same time, Minnesota is kind of that hot team right now. So can you hold too much against them? Run differential wise, it's pretty rough for the Baltimore Orioles. They're in the bottom 5 of the league. They did have the one game against the Reds that really destroyed it, but at the same time, we're not seeing the offense on the side of things allowing them to really have blowout wins. So that's going to add up over the long term as well. Baltimore has a tough hill to climb, especially in this American League East, and they are in last place in 12, 13 games below 500. I don't know if they can get out of it. Next up, this one is really starting to get difficult. 23 was one of those positions on the board that you can go back and forth with a couple of teams. It's going to be some arguments with one team or another, and I kind of landed on Milwaukee. And the truth of the matter is, when I started to match up this team, how I've seen them perform at least over the last little while, when I look at their roster or I look at the pitching rotation, I have concerns when they have a matchup against any of the teams ahead of them. So that's kind of where I landed. I understand that they are kind of floating around 500 in a division that is up for grabs. So it's very possible going a little bit of a run that we'll talk about a couple of teams doing that, just that, and they'll move up this board. They didn't have a bad week whatsoever. 2-1 against Houston, 1-2 against Tampa, so 500 week, but it's just not enough to really move the needle for me on Milwaukee. They haven't really demonstrated anything for me in the past month that has me have confidence in them. And at this point, when we're talking about teams, it's going to be about confidence. Next up, a team that has been battling back, but they kind of had a setback this week, and I'm not sure if I want to put my money on this team right now, especially with the powerhouses of the Mets and the Phillies in this division being able to close that gap. 1-2 over the weekend against the Pirates really had me questioning. I really wanted them to come in here and demonstrate some offensive prowess, especially against the Pirates team that didn't really send out skiing. So that does concern me. But they started the week off 3-1 against the Reds. So it's kind of like, what team do we get on what given night? Not so sure. And with Chris Sale going today and then the loss, kind of set them back. They're a couple games below 500. This is a team, this is kind of the situation. If you go on a little bit of a run, it's going to change things rather quickly. Next up, 21, we have the Tampa Bay Rays. Team that's been pretty consistently battling around 500 and giving their fight against the top teams on this board all season long. Tampa Bay always seems to be one of those teams that just doesn't bend over and take it. They don't really go on really bad runs. We haven't seen them have really bad seasons since we started doing this power rankings. This is probably the weakest Tampa Bay Ray teams we have seen in the past few years, but at the same time, we're still seeing them win series against Milwaukee this weekend. We saw Tampa Bay have their first ever home rain delay ever, obviously because they're playing in a different stadium, not under the dome. But being swept earlier in the week against Philly kind of sets the tone. To me, Tampa Bay, not a playoff team, and right now all these teams, in my opinion, aren't on their way to the playoffs. And a lot of that has to do with division. Division's kind of setting up at this point right now, number 20. I think I dropped them up a few spots. We saw an interesting week for the Athletics. They had a series matchup against Seattle Mariners earlier in the week. They take 1 out of 3. That's all right. They're not too concerned. But then we see them lose again to the Yankees, 1 out of 3. And they gave up a ton of runs to the Yankees as well. The pitching just doesn't seem to be holding teams' offenses together. The run differential, a little bit of a concern. They are second place in the American League West right now. But again, if I was posting the standings, I'd just put them up here. And right now, I don't think the Athletics are that team. They're not the team that's going to stay in that position, at least from what we're seeing. We're seeing some guys have some pretty great offensive breakouts for this team. Rooker comes to mind, Langoliers, all these guys pretty having good weeks, and we see them put up a lot of numbers. I'm not quite sure if it has to do with the ballpark or what really is playing up there. But the Athletics, they kind of got their work cut out. I don't think they're capable of really making a push at the playoffs, but maybe I will eat my words. Number 19. I know we've seen in the comments a few times that Cincinnati's on their way to the top 10, but they just can't seem to put things together. Some days their offense goes off and they win, but other times the pitching they lose is going off and they lose. So it's like one of those teams that just can't seem to get things going. This week was no different. 1-3 against Atlanta, 1-2 against Houston. And honestly, the game they won against Houston, they scored 10 runs in that first inning. And if it wasn't for that, they probably would have lost that game because I know they gave up 8 or so throughout the game and only tacked on a couple more themselves. So Cincinnati a little bit rough right now in a playoff race that's super thick. So again, I talked about this row. This row is very interesting. It's kind of me saying these are the teams that are on the outside looking in right now, out trying to stay in the race while other teams are heating up. If they don't heat up too, they're going to be falling way back. One of the hot teams in the MLB right now, we do have the Minnesota Twins moving up. I think one of the most on the board. They're currently on an 8-game win streak, sweeping the Baltimore Orioles to start the week. And they swept San Francisco over the weekend. So that played a big role in me moving them up out of the second bottom row. I had a lot of concern. We talked about them in many power ranking videos before this. They were in the bottom row, and I was pretty much putting in the towel on Minnesota's season. But I always say, and it's early in the season, if you go on an 8 to 15 game win streak, you're going to start skyrocketing. If Minnesota can build off this week that we just saw, very possible. In this division, it's very possible for them to do it. Well, you got to take care of business in their division. They didn't have any division games this week. They're going to have some coming up clearly in the near future. How that goes is going to be how they kind of traverse through this next middling pack, because we're going to talk about a lot of central teams relatively shortly. Next up, 17 of the Toronto Blue Jays. We saw the offense break out at the very least this week. We saw the offense start to come alive for this team. The bottom of the order starting to deliver a little bit, as well as other guys in it. But at the same time, we see the same kind of flaws in this Jays team that we have seen at least all season long in the bullpen. Blowing the games against the Angels, losing that series was kind of devastating, and it was really coming down to pitching because the offense started getting hot. But then they sweep Seattle. So this is a team that is just very hard to predict. Whenever I move them up the board, they start losing. Whenever I move them down the board, they start winning. So right now, they're going to be in the middle of the board until I can really figure out what this team is all about. Number 16, another team moving a lot up the board. And I have to start giving them credit. And honestly, there might be people out there saying I have them too low. They are also a team that is on an 8-game winning streak, sweeping the week against Pittsburgh and Washington. So not the best of opponents, but guys, if you're going to have a 6-0 week, I don't care who you're playing. That's a great week for any team Cardinals are just closing in. They're second in the division as well. It's one of those situations where I'm a little more optimistic than I was talking about, like with the Athletics. But this is a team I honestly don't watch a whole ton of, and I can't quite figure out how they're pulling off these wins. So if you're a St. Louis Cardinals fan, I would love to see the Cardinals in the comments below and let me know kind of what's going on with this team and a little bit of a closer look. Maybe I got to do a deep dive on this team, but they seem to be right there in it, and they're playing good baseball overall. So I'm going to put them right there in the middle right now. Number 15, I have the Royals, and I would have loved to see them build off the sweep of the White Sox with a nice series win against a team that they're going to be fighting for a playoff spot with the Boston Red Sox. But they fall short this weekend, losing that series 2-1. But they're doing what they have to do to stay competitive in this division, and that is beat up on the White Sox. So I think, like last year, it's going to come down to who beats up on the White Sox the most as well, of course, when you play each other. Right now, they are the edge over the Twins, but the Twins are hungry, and they're on their path, and to lose series while other teams winning, it's going to get some gap closed. Kansas City, that's pretty much all I got for you. You've been kind of not tested as much as I would like to see. I would like to see a lot more games from you guys, but we'll see how that goes. Next up, Texas Rangers 14. If it wasn't for Eovaldi and DeGrom this weekend, it might have been a different story, but Texas does come through with a pretty solid win against one of the top teams on this board, Detroit Tigers. But it's nice to see Eovaldi just having a Cy Young kind of season. And they got a little bit of run support from them on the offensive side. And then to see DeGrom the day before do all right, and he's coming back from injury. So that's somewhat exciting. And the offense, is it coming around? We saw right after I posted my video last week, they fired their offensive coordinator, hitting coach, whatever you want to call it. And maybe that's going to be what changes the tides for this team. But right now, run differential a little bit further back. Of course, it has to do with the offense being so poor. So I'm giving them a little bit of credit. They're on the outside. They're obviously a strong team through and through, and that we came into this season with playoff aspirations. So we're going to keep that in mind, at least for now. Next up, 13, we have the Boston Red Sox, and they're kind of just floating around, hanging around. 2-1 against Texas, 2-1 against Kansas, 4-2 weak against two teams that are right there neck and neck in this playoff race. We've seen them lose both series to the Blue Jays, so it's kind of like an interesting team. Some days they're playing out of their skulls, and other days they're not. Devers seems to be doing all right after such a slow start. Boston right there in the thick of things. I don't know if they have what it takes, but I think if we start to look at this, and we're going to talk about it maybe in the top row, the National League seems to have quite a big edge. I didn't really look at it top 6 versus top 6. I don't know if the top 12 teams have 6 AL and NL, but this could be the playoff break for the AL. In terms of looking at that. Number 12. I have the Guardians. I have to give them credit. They somehow seem to just be clicking along. 2-1 against Washington. Nice series win. 1-1 so far against Philly. They are the Sunday Nighter tonight. If you didn't know, I do film this before the Sunday Nighter. So it is the rubber match, and that's pretty exciting. They smashed on Friday, and then they kind of got smashed yesterday. So it's a pretty even matchup in Cleveland. It's just been one of those teams that overperforms at least my expectations. I know in the comments we get Guardians fans always saying I underrate them, so maybe you guys are right yet again for another year, but I'm still kind of thinking they're in that area. But dating back to last week, they had a good week, so keeping them there. Number 11, I have the Houston Astros, and I talked about them against Cincinnati already. They win that series 2-1. Could have been a different story had that second game not been so ugly in that first inning. They start the week 2 with a 1-2 series against Milwaukee, another 500 week for Houston. Houston's kind of one of those teams that I don't really hold too much against them when they kind of go steady like they have been for the beginning of the year. It seems like every year that's kind of been, sometimes they're underperforming, sometimes they start falling down a little bit. By the end, they start getting it on and they start powering it. When I see this team on paper, their home record is definitely what set them apart right now in terms of wins and losses. And thank you to the comment last week that really pointed that out, because that was super accurate. It definitely seems like a tale of two different teams. I think they're going to sort it out, Houston. They're going to have an opportunity as well. They'll kind of beat up on some of these other teams. Their schedule's been a little bit harder than others when I take a look at it. Number 10. Got the Arizona Diamondbacks, a series split with the LA Dodgers. And let me tell you what a series it was. I think it was the Friday night game that was just absolutely back and forth baseball. Absolutely crazy game when Ohtani ended up walking that game off. Fun. Arizona also started the week 1-2 against the Mets. So overall 3-4 against two top 5 teams last week. I think we'll get that, but I think I said coming into this week, Arizona's got to kind of make sure they don't fall too far behind, definitely because they do have the tough schedule. And in this National League West, guys, as you can see, they are 4th in the West and they're in 10th. So that is going to kind of come into play as the season goes on and they start to play each other a lot more. Number 9. Dropping a few spots, and of course, when you get swept over the weekend against a team that was in the second bottom row, you got to be a little bit concerned on the offense. Not quite there this weekend for the Mariners, and maybe we're seeing some flashes of last year. But at the same time, we have to give them credit where credit is due. They are in 9th. I think it was 12 series in a row that they had won until this one this weekend, so we got to give them a little bit of credit there. 2-1 against the Athletics as well. Do have them having the edge right now in the American League West. As you can see, it's very tight with 20 not too far behind if things really start to go cold for one team and hot for another. Number 8, kind of in the same spot as last week, I think. The Giants are in an interesting spot. They go 2-1 against the Cubs, and that was a massive series win. And then they get swept this weekend against Minnesota. Not holding out too much for one series. The Giants, for the most part, have played very well all season. Go and get swept against, right now, arguably the hottest team in the MLB. I'm not holding too much against it. We'll see how the next week goes for them. And we'll just build from there. Number 7. The Detroit Tigers losing over the weekend against Texas. We just quickly talked about that. And at the same time, they go into Colorado and absolutely mash the baseball and sweep that series. I think the overall run differential was over 20 and that. And people told me last week I had Detroit too low. I still kind of think this is their spot on the board. When we start to get in this top row, you're going to see that there's only one American League team, which just goes to show that I think the American League is just a little bit behind the National League in terms of talent. But at the same time, I think Detroit, they're having a great season. I've had them on this board as high as 3rd, but I just think overall, when you start matching them up, maybe in a best of 3, if you send out Scooble, you're going to get that win. You have another guy pitching. But if we're looking at a 7-game set, which is kind of what I tend to do when you're in a tight situation, matching up teams, I do think the edges go to some of these other teams, especially when it comes to the offensive side of the baseball. Number 6, holding on to this spot for another week, and a lot of it has to do with only 5 games being played. 1-1 against Cleveland. Maybe if they lose the series, I'd consider putting them to 7th per se. But the sweep against Tampa Bay in my books was a big sweep. It's against a team that typically doesn't get swept very often. They play in a tough American League East division, and we've seen Tampa Bay beat other teams that are in this top 5. So I did kind of weigh that in to kind of hold Philly into that number 6 spot. Number 5, dropping a couple of spots after back-to-back series losses this week. We have the Chicago Cubs. 1-2 against San Fran, 1-2 against the Mets. So overall, against 2 tough opponents, going 2-4, not going to hold too much against them. But the Cubs, they were one of the hottest teams, right? We saw offensively, they were just dominant for a little bit of a stretch there. Maybe they're cooling off. The pitching, of course, probably couldn't stay at the level it was. But right now, I have them as quite a huge favorite in the NL Central, with 16 being the closest team on the board here. So that kind of goes to show that I kind of think they're going to be a top row team for a little while at least. Number 4, the San Diego Padres. Would have loved to see them complete the sweep of the Rockies this weekend after winning 21 runs yesterday. But they fell a little bit short. So 2-1 against the Rockies and losing to the Yankees earlier in the week. Another 500 week. So over the past 4 weeks, it hasn't been amazing for the Padres. They had a scorching start to the season. They're still, in my opinion, one of the strongest teams in the National League, of course, at number 4 here. But it's starting to seem like a little bit of a cool-off, and we got some teams maybe 8 and above sniffing around, seeing what they can do. Want to see the Padres play some more of these top teams and see what happens. Number 3, the New York Yankees, and they are one of the higher jump-ups on this board this week, and it might be odd, 2-1 against the Padres, 2-1 against the Athletics. But offensively, they just were dominant in some of their wins this week, which I guess you would expect Judge is on a fire. He's on his way, leading the home run derby, home run lead, whatever you want to call it, this season. They have a couple of guys that were playing Cy Young style pitching. So overall in the American League, I figure the Yankees are the strongest. They are very likely to finish top in the American League for that number 1 seed, and I think that's playing into this spot. Number 2, I like the bounce back we saw from the Mets this week, putting themselves back at number 2. 2-1 against Arizona, 2-1 against the Cubs. So tough opponents this week, 2 top 10 teams winning both series. Mets continue to roll, playing great baseball, and I think if you're a Mets fan, you're super excited. This is definitely well deserved. I don't think I have much else to say. And last but not least, back at number 1, still at number 1 from last week, 2-1 against Miami, 2-2 against Arizona. Iffy-ish series against Arizona, could have easily gone the other way and we'd be having a different conversation. These bats for the Dodgers seem to just keep getting it done when it matters. The pitching has been a little iffy and scary at times, but they seem to manage with it last year. I'm giving them another week up top. Maybe some other teams are hungry enough to dethrone them next week. Let me know what you guys think. What would you change? Where am I just completely out to lunch on this board? I would appreciate all the comments, likes, and subscriptions that you guys got. Otherwise, guys, we will see you out there for that next video. Happy Mother's Day.